What's going on, everyone? This is Sarah Flash, and welcome to Gamequest. Well, I'm sure you're wondering where this series has been, since it's been so long since the last entry, and truth be known, the series kind of fell off to the wayside with day jobs and sound design and bullet heaven and everything else that's been going on in my life these days. It's been kind of hard to squeeze this series in edgewise. The good news is that we've gotten the rest of what we needed. So I guess we should dive right into it. We're going to start with stuff from Japan. And the first one we're going to take a look at here is Namco Museum Volume 2. Now this is a lot like the Namco Museum Battle Collection that we took a look at before, with one notable exception, and that would be this guy right here. This particular release actually has Dragon Spirit on it, which is a pretty cool addition. But it didn't make its way into the North American version for whatever reason. A lot of the games that were also on the Battle Collection that we took a look at before were also on Volume 1 of the Namco Museum. It was split up into two separate releases. But otherwise, a lot of the ones that we took a look at before are also on here. So, yeah, not much more to look at except for that one title, which is alright. We won't get into it all again, but if you haven't already, check out the other episode with the Battle Collection in it to see more of what's also in Volume 2. Alright, next up is a Western-developed game that we got from Japan. This one is Xyanide, and this one here was actually also known as... Ooh, a lot of glare. This one was actually also known as Xyanide Resurrection. Xyanide is a rail shooter, and it actually uses some really cool pre-rendered backgrounds to give it a lot of pop. Not much about the game is actually rendered by the PSP itself. I think only the enemies are taken care of in that sort of respect, but on the whole, Xyanide is actually pretty solid if you like rail shooters. It's one of the few on the PSP. I'm not sure that there's many more beyond Xyanide, if I'm totally honest, but it's a pretty fun ride, and it looks really, really good while you're going through it. Pretty cheap to pick up too. It's not terribly expensive out of Japan, so if you don't mind a bit of Japanese, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. Next one we're going to take a look at here is Mega Minis Volume 3. And Mega Minis Volume 3 is a compilation of a bunch of minis that were made available on the PlayStation Network. The one title of the 5 here that is notable is Who's That Flying?, which is a side-scrolling, well, defend them up, really. You have to make sure that no enemies get by to keep your city's health as high as possible. And your character can't actually get damaged. You can like fly right into an enemies, and he'll just like rip them apart. And you can fire shots, and there's different power-ups and a huge assortment of levels. It's a pretty fun game, and it's always nice to have it on in the disc-based medium. So it's a pretty good edition. It's only an Essentials cover though, so bear that in mind if you're a little picky about having the PSP Essentials on your PAL or PEGI rated PSP games. But yeah, other than that, it's otherwise exactly the same game, and it's a pretty nice addition. Didn't even know this existed until it was pointed out. So yeah, Who's That Flying? Pretty decent game. Alright, next up we have the European version of Midway Arcade Treasures Extended Play, and this comprises a few American shoot-em-ups that were produced in the 80s. We have, let's see here, I count Gauntlet. Gauntlet is kind of like a top-down, multi-directional run-and-gun in a lot of ways. Wizard of War is like a maze-based shooter. Once again, I count it as kind of a run and gun. A lot of these kind of skirt the line though, but Defender is definitely 100% shmup. Spy Hunter 2, although I never really got to grips with that game, it's not fantastic. Sinistar also makes an appearance on here though, and that's a pretty cool shooter with some interesting mechanics. On the whole, I'm not a big fan of American-style shoot-em-ups. I do much prefer the Japanese style. But these are a critical part of a complete set. And it's one that you're not going to want to miss, especially if you're a fan of older games from Midway.
If you can see the red, then you will never get the best. If you get to our first time, you get there.
Now, speaking of old games, our next one here is the Australian release of Activision Hits Remixed. Now, this one I had to be careful of because there's a ton of licensed music playing in the background. You can turn it off, though, thankfully. And basically, there are a huge amount of classic Protoshmups on here by Activision. They're mostly, if not all, Atari 2600. And there's actually some pretty rare stuff on here, like, for example, River Raid 2, Beam Rider, Spider Fighter. A lot of really good titles. And you can even unlock the patches that they used to give out back in the 80s. for people that posted high scores. Those were pretty cool. I wish I was old enough to realize what they were and get in on that. But yeah, Activision Hits Remixed. Great amount of Protoshmups on here that are actually a lot of fun to play. So again, this is another critical part to having a complete set on the PlayStation Portable. And the sheer amount of shooters in this particular release make it worth its price. Next up, we have the European release of EA Replay. Now, I was really hesitant about this one, if I'm totally honest. Every single one of the titles on here, you'd really have to be pushing it and really stretching it to say that each of these is a shoot 'em up. Wing Commander, definitely out. That's simulation all the way. Desert Strike, it's shooty, but not shooty enough. But it's still worth your while, I guess. And Bob is kind of a side-scrolling run and gun, but it's more platformer. I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on this being critical for the shoot 'em up set, but I don't know. They're kind of nice to have, I suppose. It's cheap though, at least. This particular one is the French version. Out of France, which I can read. All of the games are in English, though. You don't have to worry about that. So you can actually save a few bucks if you go for the French version, and you'll still have 100% completely English games on the disc. Finally, we've got a couple of American releases, and as it turns out, they're both by Atari. So the first one we're going to take a look at here is Atari Classics Evolved. And there's a good amount of shooters on this, not only because of the arcade versions and remixed versions of the games that they represent, but also an unlockable pantheon of Atari 2600 games. I don't have the patience to go through the process of getting these unlocked, though. It would take me far too long, because you do actually have to get all 40 achievements in the game in order to unlock them. So, I mean, you could probably cheat the system by finding a game save or something like that online, but I didn't want to be that guy. What's here, though, immediately is not that bad, though. Especially the conversions of Millipede and Centipede. They're actually pretty good. So, yeah, I definitely recommend Atari Classics Evolve. And again, it's a critical part of the American side of things when it comes to getting that complete set on PSP. So it's not terribly expensive either, so you shouldn't have too much trouble getting this in your library. The final one that we're going to take a look at here, and I was turned on to this by a fellow that goes by Soft Otaku. You probably know him online through YouTube or other channels. He had mentioned that a game called Hot Pixel was one to look for in terms of shooting, and I'm like, really? And having just opened it up and played it starting yesterday, I could definitely see where he's coming from. There are a number of... This plays a lot like WarioWare. There's a lot of micro games on here that last just a few seconds. It's way closer to the WarioWare formula than Work Time Fun or Baito Hell 2000. And yeah, there are a lot of shooting style micro games in there, but there's even an unlockable multi-stage side scroller as well. So I'd say this is definitely even a much more worthwhile pickup than Baito Hell was by a long shot. It's more fun, it's more humorous, and and it's actually something that I wouldn't mind going back to again to unlock more stuff in, which says quite a bit. Now, this was only like $7 brand new, so it should not take much to track down and get a copy of Hot Pixel if that's something you'd be interested in checking out. Well, that does it. That was the last set of games that we needed for our Gamequest on the PlayStation Portable. We are 100%, to our knowledge, we're 100% complete on these titles, and it was kind of an interesting road. A lot of stuff came up that I wasn't even aware of, and that's awesome. But you know, like all great things, they do need to come to an end. So this is it. We are closing the book on the PlayStation Portable. I'm satisfied that we're 100% complete. Anyways, thanks for joining us on this Gamequest, and we hope to see you on the next one. Bye for now. But where one quest ends, another begins. We have another series of Gamequest incoming, and you may or may not be surprised as to what it might be. And the best part? We've already gotten a huge start on it all.